Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a movie called The Unhealer. So, really, this movie kind of does remind me of kind of like a Brightburn, or it kind of reminds me of, like, recently, the movie Unholy, like the movie with Jeffrey Dean Morgan, and it kind of reminds me of that. It also kind of reminds me of like the. It kind of reminds me of The Crow a little bit too, but like we have a kid in this movie who kind of obtains superpowers by a bizarrish way, and like this kid kind of comes off as like also another for comic book reference. This guy comes off as like the X-Men character Legion's uh, uh, one of his personas called Bleeding Image. So we have a lot of voodoo, a lot of like Indian or Native American things going on with this story, and so eventually we have a bizarrish opening, but eventually once we start to get to this kid eventually getting these superpowers technically in this movie, that's when the film I think does start to pick up. But also we have Kelly, who also has this this also odd eating disorder as well. So it's kind of like, man, this movie's weird, but it's also like kind of interesting. And so going into this movie, I thought this movie was good enough. Like really, like to me, like a solid okay film, reasonably, for this. Like, yeah, it had like a goofy opener. Yeah, like, but it also had a pretty decent cast. Like you have like kind of going through the line here, like basically the guy who is to first play the healer, of course, like a lot of people know him from Aliens. Funny enough, we have the person who plays Kelly's mother in this movie is also from the movie like Species. So bizarrely, we have like a ton of people that are from like alien movies, or like from some kind of big films and stuff like that. The guy that plays the sheriff in this film was also from the movie New Mutants that just recently came out. So, anyways, going on to this film. So, what is this movie about exactly? So, we end up having a man going out into the boondocks somewhere to I guess seemingly uncover this skull and do some kind of ritual. And eventually, this guy is to get struck by lightning, and he is endowed with these healer powers. So he tries to use these healer powers to make a buck, and really, like, he makes like three or four to heal some woman, and then all of a sudden, we have Kelly's mother, who has her son who's getting really ill because of his eating disorder. Because he just randomly goes and starts eating any number of things. Like, all of a sudden, like, he'll just, like, pick up uh, like, a pencil and he'll eat the pencil. Or like he'll just pick up an atom, an object that you shouldn't be able to eat, and he eats it. Like at one point, he's in the hospital and he's eating his his bandage, his wound, his he's like tearing it off and eating it. It's like, I'm like, man, this kid's like, I wonder if like he accidentally ate any of these, swallowed anything and whatever. Like, man, like how, like, more than likely, like he probably wouldn't have been that dumb. But when looking at it, mistakes can happen in a movie where like this kid like eating any numerous things and just like, anyways. So going into this film, so we have this kid who is having this eating disorder, and so this healer is trying to heal this kid, but then eventually there's a side effect where this healer is to die, and so I guess the kid is to be endowed with these powers. So he ends up cutting himself. It heals quickly. He ends up having his mother pinch him the arm, and she feels it. And so it seems that anything or anyone that tries to hurt Kelly, someone else, goes through it and heal and hurts from it. And so we have consistently Kelly, who has been consistently been treated like garbage from these town bullies, calling him trash boy, and really just like hating on this kid, and really eventually once the bodies start to drop, we eventually have these boys who are just looking at this trash kid, and they're like, yeah, we need to do something about this kid. Like we end up having like the bully's parents involved and all kinds of things, and so eventually we also have this red elk guy who is to try and like mention, it's like, oh well, like this power has now changed from this person, and so like I need to figure out a way to like bottle this power and give it back to me so I can like we can be able to like just resolve all this. But eventually that doesn't happen. So pushing on to get into spoilers about this movie. Yeah, like I thought like it was a kind of a very much interesting revenge like movie. There are scenes here and there that I think are clunky, but it is what it is. Really, I thought that this movie was an interesting concept. Um, and so, like, I think I was just fine with the movie. So, with that said, let's get into the coveted double five time territory to go into talk about this movie. Go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. Immediately, I would say if you haven't seen this movie yet, go into an app I think that is called Letter C Movies, and you can see that there. I think there is also probably a number of apps you can probably dare in fact watch this. Probably on Fox HD Movies. If you put that into the search engine, you'll probably see a logo there that'll go and have you see any number of movies for absolutely free. Ba 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 ba. Let's go into spoilers. So, like I said, at the very beginning of this movie, we have Fluger who is going out in the desert somewhere to perform some ritual. He's getting hit by lightning and he ends up smacking into his van. He's like, what the heck was that? And so we have Luger who is to go via the next day to mention that he is some healer, and he is to eventually have this old woman mention her problems, and so we have Fluger who is to heal her of her problems with her giving him like a couple of bucks. So we have Bernice who has a son who is going through an eating disorder, and we have a doctor making a home visit to Kelly, which is Bernice's son. And so this doctor is trying to hit on Bernice after this whole this whole like eating disorder, basically mentioning like there isn't a real easy way to cure this via medicine. Like maybe they need to have him go to a psychologist and like see somebody that way to maybe help him figure out how to cure this whole thing. So we have eventually Bernice seeking out Fluger to help her with her son Kelly, heal him. And so we have Fluger, who is going and is to try to heal Kelly, and eventually he needs to go to the bathroom because like, whoa, this is some tough healing. And so we have Fluger going back, and then he is to light a cigarette, and then he drops a part of ash on this kid's chest, and then tries to heal him yet again. And so we have Fluger, who all of a sudden is having every single ailment that he has ever cured all hit him all at once, and so he ends up immediately dying. So we bizarrely have Kelly endowed with all of Fluger's powers, and so the very first thing that Kelly is to do is that he is to cut himself while trying to fix his bike, because evidently his bike doesn't really have a really solid and good chain. Because Kelly is to go onto the town, and we have some bullies going and dumping Kelly into this trash can because he's trash boy. And so we eventually have Dominique and this other girl coming into the fray to try and stop these bullies from hurting Kelly. And so Kelly gets out of the dumpster, and so Dominique offers to give him a ride to school. And the other girl's like, well, no, because I don't want like slime all over my my car, meaning that basically like Kelly is slime to her basically. So pushing on, so we have Kelly now with these powers, and immediately we have Dominique, who is looking at Kelly, and she's like, you know what, he looks like a lot different now. We also have Dominique, who is to go home and mentioning that I think that she is done with her old boyfriend, and she's kind of looking at kind of other suitors. And so Dominique mentions to her mother about Kelly, and so we have we have Dominique's mother, who's like, that kid, he's trash. Is like, dude, you just sound like my boyfriend. And so we go on, and so we are to have Dominique, who's looking at photos, just kind of like seeing like, well, maybe Kelly could be the one. So now we are to kind of showcase Kelly's powers. So we have Kelly, who is to put a lighter over his hand, and he does not get hurt. We have Kelly, who is to go to this convenience store to be picked on by some bully named Reed. And so we have like Kelly talking all kinds of smack to Reed. And so Reed goes and starts to hit Kelly, and Kelly feels nothing, but Reed feels it. And so eventually we have Reed, who ends up hitting Kelly with this piece of wood, and that just hurts Reed. And so we eventually have Kelly going to school, and Kelly is to see Dominique in his class, and so Dominique is to drop her hairband thing, and so Kelly takes a little bite of a tag, and so Kelly gives Dominique her headband back, and so we all of a sudden have Kelly, who is just in school having this fantasy about him, daydreaming about him and Dominique having these passionate romantic getaway, get together, whichever's. And so we have Kelly, who is kind of feeling a little like getting his motor running. But all of a sudden, we are starting to also see Dominique and also Dominique's friend go and having the same kind of getting their motor running as well, to the point of them at some point like moaning for a second here and there, but then all of a sudden they realize where they are and they're like, oh yeah, well it's time to go. Yeah, so we have like Kelly with all kinds of interesting powers. So we eventually have Kelly who is to push on, and so we have where Kelly is going home, and so Gus, who is or no, wait, let's see, yeah, Gus, who is Reed's father, comes to Kelly's home to just kind of mention like, hey, yeah, like, yeah, so Kelly, yeah, like he hurt my son, and Bernice is like, well, probably whatever he did, he probably had it coming to him. And so Gus is trying to explain how Reed had quite possibly gotten hurt, and it doesn't make sense, but he's like, well, yeah, but like, your son hurt my son. And so it's like, and Bernice is like, so what? Like, so there were roughhousings. So what? Is he dead? No. Well, what's the problem? So, like, Gus is trying to figure this out, and like he just can't like really figure out like what like is Gus gonna try to punish Kelly? Like what's to like what is he gonna try to do? But so they couldn't do anything about anything. But eventually, like that's when Kelly is to show Bernice that with Bernice punching or pinching Kelly, that Bernice gets hurt and Kelly doesn't. And so she's like, wow, that is kind of interesting. So we eventually have Kelly, who's trying to think of all these future jobs that he can use his power with, like a Navy SEAL or any kind of number of things. And so Bernice is like, well, yeah, but we probably shouldn't tell anybody that you have this kind of power. But eventually, Kelly does eventually tell Dominique, because he kind of basically has to. So we are to eventually go on. So we have Reed and all these other kids. Reed and oh wait a minute. We have Red Elk, who is to talk to Fluger and to mention that he's an Indian, and he is going to, and he realizes that Fluger has the medicine power, and this guy can't actually control this kind of power, and he should give it up. And Fluger's like, dude, you like, I'm not gonna give up this power. Like, red red idiot or whatever. And we consistently have Red Elk consistently correcting him, and so we push on. So we have these kids who are all at this party, and so eventually we have them eventually all drive off. And so we eventually have these group of kids who are to see Kelly, who is riding his bike around. And so they're like, you know what? Like, let's scare this kid. Like, if anything, like we hate this kid. We really want to just scare him off so badly. So we have these kids that are consistently like driving their car ever so close to Kelly, and Kelly's trying to bike as fast as he can humanly possibly bike. And so eventually we get to the point where there's like this back and forth thing to where like eventually like the kids in the car are eventually like skirting to get in front of Kelly and all kinds of things. This is just to turn off badly. So Kelly is biking like crazy, but eventually he ends up uh, falling, and we end up having this car run over him, and we have Kelly, who is to supposedly be ran over, but actually every little bit of car accident that happens to Kelly actually happens to the driver instead. I think his name was Brad. So evidently Brad was Dominique's girlfriend, and now he's dead. So it seems that everyone else is okay in this car but the driver, and so he's dead. So we have Kelly, who is to be like in the back of this car, and so eventually we are to see Dominique uh, kind of making her way here, and we have Kelly, who is to mention to Dominique, it's like, dude, they ran me over, and uh, if anything, I'm completely fine, and so eventually we have like really uh Bernice eventually is to come there and to be with Kelly, and uh Kelly tells Bernice that he had told Dominique exactly what happened, and Bernice is like, "Well, that's fine if you tell like one person, but don't tell everybody. Like, if anything, like you should come up with a different story for how like you got like out of this whole car wreck." And so Kelly just mentions, "Yeah, like I'll just say that I just wound it up in the bushes. Like I almost died," kind of thing. And so we have reasonably that now we have Nelson, who is just like, you know what? Like, if anything, I think somehow, like, Kelly had killed Brad. So now, like, I want a vendetta being put on this Kelly guy. Because we have also that Dominique is starting to spend quite a bit of time with Kelly, even to the point of Kelly mentioning it's like, well, hey, there's this new Halloween movie out. And Kelly's like, yeah, there is a new one, isn't there? And so Dominique is kind of like telling Kelly, it's like, well, like, how about you do this thing called Ask Me Out? And so Kelly's like, oh, like that's what you're trying to get at. And so Kelly asked Dominique out on a date Friday night to go to the new Halloween movie, and so they go out. So we have Nelson, who's like, hey, like Dominique is spending too much time with him, so we need to get rid of him somehow. And so we have Nelson and the rest of the Goon Squad all going to Kelly's home. Sadly enough, Kelly is not there, only his mother is. And so we end up having these bullies all go, and it seems like and it seems that these kids plan on kind of taking all of these like support beams for Bernice's and Kelly's home. Like they're trying to take the support beams and like pull them out. And so they take this chain and try to pull these support beams out. And so eventually we have Bernice in the home, and like she's feeling kind of sick. And then so we have Bernice, who is to start to have her home like try to like jostle around, which was it's kind of a goofy way of doing this, but like the end product just looks interesting. It looks good enough. So we have Bernice, who's kind of like ruckusing through the house, like trying to get out of her home, and eventually we have the stove in this home who ends up tipping over, and the gas starts to the gas line breaks, and so we start seeing this gas come in, and so we coincidentally have Bernice, who eventually ends up smacking into this lamp that ends up breaking onto the ground, and so this lamp ends up starting a fire, which explodes this entire house. So we have Kelly, who is to see this fire when he's to get back with his bike to his home. And so Kelly rushes in to get his mother, who is now a sadly enough crispy critter. She is really dead. So, like, really dead. I mean, really dead. So we have Kelly, who is mourning the loss of his mother, and so really Kelly has no real true family here, and so we have Kelly, who is just kind of like left with third degree burns or whichever, and so he is at this hospital trying to get better over these burns, but eventually the doctors are realizing, man, like his burns are healing really quickly. So really the only family that Kelly has left is this sheriff. Sheriff Sheriff Alder or Adler. There we go. We have Sheriff Adler that seems to have maybe had a thing with Bernice, but it seems like that wasn't exactly like cemented. Like it seemed like Adler really did like Bernice, and so really we have Kelly, who is just kind of left with like Alder kind of like helping Kelly like transition from where he needs to go next. Like uh, we are almost going to have Kelly having to leave town because like to just go to his next of kin family. So we have Kelly, who is in the hospital, and Adler is telling these doctors to kind of leave him for another day because like Kelly needs to figure out a perfect way to transition. So we have Kelly, who is eventually going to his mother's funeral, and we have Dominique, who's trying to console Kelly, and we eventually have them kiss. And so, because Dominique is like, I don't want you to leave town, and Kelly's like, well, I don't either, but what else can I do? And they kind of cement that they do love one another. And so we push on to have Kelly at Pfluger's grave, and so we have Kelly, who grabs one of the leaves of Pfluger's grave and eats it, and then he ends up barfing. Don't know why, but he just does. So we have eventually that Kelly is going and is to one way or the other kind of find out that these guys were the ones that had killed his mother. And because we eventually have Adler, who is kind of the sheriff, who's kind of going around and trying to investigate and try to figure out who is the culprits who had killed Bernice. And eventually we have Sheriff Adler, who is to talk to Gus. And so we eventually have Adler realize that there are chains in the back of some truck. And so Adler is kind of putting it together that Nelson is the culprit who had killed Bernice. Because he's the only one in town that has chains in the back of his truck still from that thing. And so we push on. So Kelly eventually finds that out, but also we have Nelson and his boys like all going and flipping Kelly off because like they're basically seeing Kelly going out of town. And so Kelly eventually jumps out of the sheriff's car to eventually run away, to eventually see where these boys are heading. They're all going to like go and jump into this water and start to swim. And so we eventually have Reed, who is kind of like almost starting to separate himself from the rest of this group. And so we end up having this kid who is Tucker. And so Tucker ends up going into the water. And so Kelly's really thinking that he wants to kill every single one of these bullies before he is to leave this town. And so Tucker goes into the water, and so we have Kelly who is to go and bite a piece of Tucker's shirt and then eventually take Tucker's shirt and tie Tucker's shirt to choke Kelly himself out. And so we are starting to see Tucker, who is all of a sudden start to choke now, and he is in this water, and he is starting to dip into this water. And so Kelly is choking himself and almost to the point of passing out, and Tucker is now drowning in this water, and he dies. So we have Kelly, who is now dead. The guys jump in the water to try to save him, but he's dead. They thought he was fooling around at first. Like, we had them kind of messing around, and they were throwing rocks at Tucker into the water. And, like, the sheriff also makes the consensus of, like, well, like, did any of you probably hit him with a rock, and maybe that's what, like, knocked him unconscious, and that's what led to his death? Because these kids are immediately thinking that, like, Kelly is the culprit for all of this. Even if it doesn't make sense, he's still the culprit somehow. He has some voodoo magic power that doesn't make any sense. But it does eventually, I guess. So, we have Kelly who's like, well, hey, like, one bully down, like, the rest of you left. And so, eventually we push on to eventually have, Kelly who is to go and talk to this one bully named Tony. And so we have Tony, who seems to be doing these impressions and is seemingly trying to win over these women and so on and so forth, and doing all these like rhyming and rapping things. And so Kelly's like, oh, well, hey, like, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to be just like Tony. Like, we have Kelly and Tony in this science room. And so Kelly is trying to seem just like Tony, like going and doing all these accents that Tony was doing, and grabbing Tony's hat and trying to sound just like him, to the point where eventually Tony goes and finds a thing of acid to toss into Kelly's face, I guess to finally just kill him off or to shut him up. And so we end up having Kelly who's hit with this acid, but it doesn't affect him, it actually affects Tony, and so Tony ends up dying. And so we eventually push on. So we have Gus, who is to tell both of his sons, both Reed and both Nelson, to get onto the football field because, like, he's sick of this, and I guess he's probably gonna have them like run laps or train for football practice or something. And so Reed is mentioning that he has a concussion, and I don't think that he should be on the field. And Gus is like, well, toughen up, wussy. So we have Reed and Nelson going to the field, and so of course, like, Kelly is going to try and figure out a way to find something of Nelson and Reed's to try and eventually go and try to kill them off. So we eventually have Kelly, who is going on to this football field with a drill in hand. And so we end up eventually having the sheriff, like, running to the field of, like, hey, like, Kelly, stop this. So we have Kelly, who is drilling holes into his own knees to drop Nelson, and Nelson is in utter agony, and Gus is trying to figure out what to do. Coach Gus is trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And so we also had had Nelson uh, and Dominique's friend like realize, or no, wait, maybe it was Tucker's girlfriend. Yeah, maybe it was Tucker's girlfriend. We have them teaming up to go and, like, you know what, like, we gotta figure out how to beat this kid. He has to have some weakness. And we have this girl who ended up seeing uh, Kelly go and eat a leaf off of Pfluger's grave, and he ended up getting sick. And so we have Nelson and Reed going and putting together a weapon out of this stuff, out of Pfluger's uh, leaf remains. And so they end up putting it into a weapon, which does jack crap nothing, but they just, I guess, needed something like some kind of like kryptonite thing going on here, which doesn't exactly work, but it is what it is. So we have Kelly, who is now putting holes into his leg, and so the sheriff is trying to talk him out of stopping doing this. It's wrong. Ba 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 ba. And so we eventually have, I think we have Reed, who eventually is to come up with a weapon, and eventually we just have like Kelly just taking everybody out to where like it doesn't matter what they try to do. And then the sheriff ends up trying to uh, stop Kelly, because Gus ends up grabbing a gun and shooting Kelly in the head, and that just shoots Gus in the head and kills him off. So really, anything that anyone is trying to do, like, eventually I think Reed ends up running off, and so Kelly's like, you know what, I'm starting to actually like Reed out of all of you bullies. Like, it seems like Reed is turning over a new leaf compared to everybody else. So we have eventually uh, Kelly is now with a gun, and so Dominique is running onto the field. Sheriff is trying to convince him to stop, and so we eventually have the sheriff who had talked to Red Elk and had mentioned that that Kelly has this power, and really the sheriff is like, yeah, I don't think we should go into any of these kinds of, like, Kelly's really had some rough times now, and I don't think we should go into this, like, medicine talk and like and all this tribal thing. No, let's not do that now. But eventually, sheriff is thinking that Red Elk could perform some ritual to try and help Kelly, and uh, that's what the sheriff is going with. So we have sheriff who's convincing Kelly to not kill it or shoot anybody, because Red Elk is going to try and cure Kelly, and Dominique is like, yeah, like, I hate this new person that you've turned into, and if you let them try to take this out of you, then I will help you, and I'll be I'll be there for you. So we have Kelly and Dominique and the sheriff and Red Elk at this ritual. So we have Red Elk trying to perform this ritual, and Kelly is kind of like, ugh. But we have Red Elk mention that Kelly is like, it's the thing in him is too far in, and so really, like, they can't just get it out. It seems impossible. And so we sadly have, because I guess they had dug out Pfluger, and so eventually Kelly uh, is to eventually go and fall into uh, is to fall into this grave, because she had gotten she had gotten shot, I think. And so we eventually have we eventually have Kelly, who is to go in this grave with Dominique, and realizing that her death had forced him to want to try and end his own life. And so Kelly tries to basically have his own, all of his powers all come at him at once and kill him off. So we eventually have seemingly this all resolved. The sheriff and Red Elk are like, well, Red Elk, did you get the power? And Red Elk is like, no. And so we eventually have the ambulance drivers who are driving away with these bodies, and we end up finding out that Dominique has the power now because she has been revived from her death, and she is to be the Unhealer now. And I guess that's going to be, I guess, what the sequel would have been if there would be a sequel. So with that said, like, I think I kind of covered most of everything. Towards the end there, I was kind of getting a little like, what happened? But that's because I have so many other things to review besides this. But I thought that this movie was good enough. Like, with that said, I'm good enough to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Blah, blah, blah. Goodbye, everybody.